Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on behalf of BNP Paribas to the work stream on defining your sustainable finance KPIs. Sustainability is a macro trend, and sustainable finance is now a mainstream part of our industry. But we need to make sure that these structures are robust and are contributing to real improvements, and debt and equity investors will be looking into this. I hope you enjoy this session, and I now hand over to Michelle to get us going.
Thank you, Simon. So I'm going to be your moderator today, and my mission is to keep this workshop moving because we've got a pretty ambitious outline. To get us started actually in the mode, I wanted to see if we could play the first polling question. I understand you guys are all pretty versed in using the Slido tool. So we're going to have the first polling question, which is really a really easy question. Have you done or are you considering sustainable finance in the next 6 to 9 months? So hopefully that question is being deployed through Slido at the moment. And then we will get your answer. The agenda today is we're going to start with two of our sustainable finance experts from BNP Paribas to bring to life the sustainable finance topic. And then we're going to head to a live real case study from TESCO. And then we'll move back into Q&A. So could I just get confirmation that that polling question has gone live? I can't see anything on my screen.
Yeah, we can see it there. So we're at... Okay.
Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay, I think we've got a pretty clear, we've got the numbers ticking up, and almost 60% say considering sustainable finance, which is great. Okay, yeah. All right. I think Agnes and Letitia, I'm going to hand over to you. Agnes is the head of sustainable finance capital markets for global banking at BNP Paribas, and Letitia is a director within the sustainable finance practice as well. So I'm going to hand over to you ladies to start things. You've got, you can see 6 out of 10 of our delegates are considering sustainable finance, which is great. So I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good afternoon to all. So effectively, what we wanted to do today in a very short time frame is really to focus on one approach in sustainable finance, which is sustainability linked. So it's great to see that actually so many of you are considering sustainable finance, because effectively what we can do today is run you through the basics of, how you would do that. And then you'll have a really kind of, live case study from our colleagues at TESCOs, so you will see what it means in practice. Effectively, when you think about sustainable finance, you have 2 big approaches in the world. I'm going to open the slide on my other screen as well. And when we are talking now today, we focus on sustainability linked. So what we are saying that we look really at the corporate level, and we are going to try to integrate in your financing, your medium, short to long-term targets, and that can be environmental, social, sometimes governance targets. And there is another world in sustainable finance where we focus on identifying projects. So we leave that one aside for today. The big benefit of sustainability linked financing is that you can use that approach for multiple financial instruments. So we are going to focus on bonds and loans, but it's very commonly used in the derivatives world, supply chain, sustainable supply chain, or even trade finance. So you can keep in mind that actually whatever we are going to describe today with my colleague Letitia, you could use it even more broadly. On the slide, if we can go to the previous slide, actually. Thank you. On that slide, what you are seeing is the 5 core elements of sustainability linked financing. And effectively, we are defining KPIs. So if most of the time that will be what you as a corporate already have in your strategy, or once you discuss with your bank, you might consider establishing new KPI and a new strategy for it. But the way we choose them is we say they have to be core and material to your activity, and they have to be verifiable and measurable, because what will happen is we'll set targets and see, you know, over the life of the transaction, whether you achieve those targets or not. What is quite important when you look at the targets is we say the targets have to be ambitious. By that, we really don't mean, you know, shoot for the moon, we don't know what's going to happen. It is really embedded in your strategy. And what it means by ambitious is really, it has to be a material improvement happening over time. And obviously, as a company, you would have a strategic plan to attain these targets. The third element of the transaction is what happens to the financial characteristics of the instrument. On the loan side, you will have an interest margin going up or down, depending if you've achieved or not the target. On the bond side, there is what we call an asymmetrical structure. So you could, if you were not attaining the target, you could have a step up. What we observe in the market is that issuers tend to price better actually their sustainability-linked bond versus a conventional bond. And that's really due to better momentum at the time of the transaction and better demand. And the last two components are what the two are, if you want, so reporting and review. And reporting means that ideally you would have an annual reporting, and at the very least you would do a reporting at the time you would test the KPI. And review, you would have an external review most often that would be done by your external auditors. So on the following slides, what we try to show you is what is really underpinning this market. And if we can have on the screen the following slide, you will see it in parallel. We've put the sustainability-linked loan and sustainability-linked bonds. And originally that market really started on the loan side. And the LMA was the first to set the sustainability-linked loan principles in 2019. And at BNP Paribas, we are involved both with the LMA and with ICMA, so both myself and Laetitia. And in 2020, the ICMA followed with the sustainability-linked bond principles. And what happened a couple of weeks ago was the LMA really aligning the SLL with the SLL principle with the SLB principles, wherever possible, I would say. So where you will see differences really in the two markets is mostly due to the nature of the market, i.e. the bond market being a public market most of the time, whereas the loan market is a private market. And so you will see that everywhere we say it is recommended, for example, to make public the achievement of the target, also setting up the target on the loan side. It is actually a requirement to make them public on the bond market. And that's usually, when you will see differences. I would say as a word of conclusion, and then I'll pass over to Laetitia, really this instrument is a strategic instrument for any corporate, in that it will allow you to really set, to really embed in your financing what is already or is going to be implemented in your strategy. And that's always the way we would look at it when we work with our clients. Laetitia, I'll hand it over to you to discuss the KPIs more in detail.
Thank you very much, Agnès. So if we could look at the slides, it would actually be the 5 before the 4. I realize the story tells better on this way if possible. So if we can have the 5, the following one, if that's possible, which is the way we select when we are sustainability advisor, either for a sustainable bond or a loan. The way we look at, and it's the following slide, but otherwise I'm gonna, yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. The way we look at advising clients and working with them, with corporates, is indeed looking, obviously, at not reinventing the wheel. The idea is to look at the sustainability strategy that you have in place and the public commitments that you have in place, because one of the purposes of sustainable finance is to highlight what the company is doing and achieving, and on which they have an important, ambitious trajectory. So it's things that should be in there, and the way we do our very first analysis to make recommendations on materiality is a bit on this wave that you see here. So obviously, it is fundamental to look at the international benchmarks in terms of materiality, which are standards such as SASB and GRI, but as well we look at in parallel at the materiality matrix per sector that some ESG rating agencies do, such as Sustainalytics and Vigeo, with whom I'm sure you're very familiar. On the top, then when we have done that analysis, we of course compare it to the materiality matrix analysis that the corporate has done for itself in most of the cases, and as well with very importantly what the peers have done and what has been done both in terms of public commitments, and as well it can happen in terms of what they've done in the market as well, what KPIs have been used in the market, because there is an evolution, there is a very clear evolution and an increasing degree of demand, I would say, in terms of the fundamental approach on KPIs, and that's where we can link to the previous slide number 4, if we can move to that one, which is what that's I think that's Natasha's one. If we can move one before that, yeah, that one, perfect. So the big here there are the 2 big families of KPIs that have been ever used in the SL, especially on the loan market, SL-linked loan market, which are either what we call internal KPIs, but by all means, they are KPIs on which a company have internal KPIs, but those are most of the time reported publicly, so don't get fooled by the term. And external ESG ratings in comparison were used very much at the principle of these markets when probably or sometimes for companies that have a less developed sustainability strategies, so sometimes they would not have necessarily commitments, public commitments, and still it gives, so ESG ratings is not so much used nowadays, but it could be used, and as you know, you can either have holistic view on that, or they give an holistic view on a company. And we're not going to get into a debate here on pros and cons of ESG ratings, but just to say they do have an ESG view on all the 3 components of sustainability. So, and all they can be used, sub-ratings can be used. I think that most importantly, we've seen a very important development of internal KPIs, on which companies, of course, see their own sustainability strategy reflected into the financing, and as well, of course, you therefore have a control over, or some sort of control on your KPIs. I mean, and here I would say, just as a finishing word, there are the ones you cannot live without, such as environmental and GHG emissions, and some of KPIs that are developing as of we speak on social components, notably, but as well on circular economy and responsible sourcing that are developing and that we see more in the market at the moment. So on this note, I would pass on to Natasha, who's head of treasury and funding for TESCO.
Thank you very much. If we could move on to the next slide, which is the first in the, yeah, perfect. So TESCO's sustainability approach focuses on 4 pillars across people, product, planet and places. And the Little Helps plan at the centre of this sets our level of ambition, the strategies for delivery, and it's the mechanism by which we report our progress annually. We've identified topics where the expectations, risks and opportunities for TESCO are greatest, and where we can make the most significant contribution. And we've also set these against the backdrop of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Little Helps plan enables us to demonstrate, monitor and improve our performance both within our own operations and across the wider supply chain. So I won't read all the elements listed on this slide, but I wanted to highlight that establishing sustainability commitments is not something new for TESCO. We've had really long-standing environmental commitments, having been the first company globally to commit to being a zero carbon business in 2009. And we were also the first to set science-based targets aligned to a 1.5 degree trajectory in 2017. Sustainability is embedded across Tesco, and aligning our financing activities with the sustainability agenda was a natural next step for us as a Treasury team to be able to demonstrate in a different way the strength of Tesco's commitments to its sustainability strategy. And if we could move on to the next slide. In 2020, it was the ideal time for us to approach this topic because we had the opportunity to develop an aligned set of sustainability-linked financing initiatives, all starting from our Little Helps plan. We intended to refinance our RCF, and we'd been watching the developments of the sustainability-linked bond market with great interest. I'm only going to focus on the first two elements in this, as those are the ones that are linked to Tesco's own funding. But we wanted to make sure that we weren't diluting any of the existing efforts in the business by establishing competing objectives. And so we really felt it important to work with already established targets and the reporting and assurance processes that went with those. And that was a really key principle for us in developing our sustainability linked financing. It also meant that the ongoing reporting and compliance is not any extra work for the business because we'd already been publishing the data regardless of any financing activity. And we wanted to start with the RCF, which we refinanced in September, and use this as the key to then being able to establish if we could issue a sustainability linked bond, as the RCF allowed us to establish who the right colleagues to work with were and gave us the opportunity to engage with people across very different areas of our business to explain what funding is and how we in finance could help support the company's ESG ambitions. And it, as I've said before, allowed us to establish the correct governance procedures and processes. And as we wanted our sustainability linked financing to be aligned, we knew that our initial selection criteria should identify a short list of KPIs that we could link our funding to and that we could look to for the loan as well as the bond. And we went through all the processes that Agnes and Letitia have outlined, and we really focused on what KPIs were already assured and had a really material goals associated with them and were ambitious. And so if we move on to the next slide, we've got an outline of the two transactions together. But the most important thing to note is that we used 3 KPIs from the Little Helps plan for our RCF, which were greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for scope 1 and 2, aligned on the 1.5 degree trajectory, the sourcing of renewable energy, and also food waste in our UK operations. And when it came to the bond, we knew that we wanted to have a really simple and clear structure, and we wanted to focus on one issue. So from the KPIs that we'd already used in the RCF, the scope 1 and 2 reduction was the natural choice for us, as it's the biggest as climate change is the biggest challenge we face, and it's an area that we've had really long-standing commitments in. We were really pleased with how our banking group received our RCF, and from the company perspective, it gave us the confidence that we could proceed with issuing an SRB, having already established what processes to follow. The flexibility on the use of proceeds for SRBs is what's enabled us to issue debt in an ESG linked format, because we used it in the same way that we would have done a conventional bond. And in January, we did something that we've done many times before, which was undertake a funded liability management exercise with the SRB as the source of proceeds. And with the execution of the bond itself, we had hoped that we would be able to observe some greenium, which would make the economics of the combined exercise more compelling. But we were delighted with the final pricing outcome. And we were also really pleased with the order book in terms of not just the size, but the number of investors who participated and the engagement that we got in our marketing process. We're continuing to monitor the evolution of the SRB market because every issuance is different, and it's really interesting to see how different issuers are choosing to structure their transactions, particularly on what they're picking for their KPIs. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and also Agnes and Letitia. I think that was a great way to learn about the evolution of the sustainability-linked market, the importance of the materiality of those KPIs, and then the really invaluable live experience from Tesco to really see it happening both on the SLL and on the SLB side. So I'm sure you guys are going to have lots of questions, but we're going to actually ask you guys one question before we let you ask us a question. And that question is, in the year of COP26, when you're all on the race to zero, wanted to have you guys answer the question of what's the biggest driving force accelerating you to towards sustainability, including net zero strategies. Your employees, your customers, senior leadership, government, all of the above. So if you guys can get back onto Slido and help us with that question, and that's then going to lead us into the Q&A. Oh, geez, we've got all of the I guess forces coming from everywhere, and I think that's probably an important message. We are seeing some other sort of dynamic changes happening here. Let's see how we're going as we move up the ticker. It's like watching a horse race. I think what's clear is that there's many driving forces that are moving in this direction. So with that, we are going to open it up to Q&A. I understand that you're going to be able to submit these questions onto the screen. I'm just going to move back to that section. Our panelists are going to be jumping in and answering these questions. So I see that, why don't we start at the top there, a question from Naresh. How should a company balance the need for ambitious targets with the risks of failure? Agnes, maybe that's a good one for you to start with.
I can answer from one perspective. So that's a question that is being asked to investors very frequently, obviously. And ESG investors will reply very openly that actually, you know, they really don't want issuers obviously to fail. I mean, you know, they don't want actually to get the coupon step up. This is part of the structure to really incentivize issuers to attain the objective, but this is really not, you know, not viewed as a potential, you know, financial option for a step up. So, you know, the incentive is really there, even for investors to really help corporates along the way, as they will have regular updates. Because I was touching upon the public nature of the bonds, which means that in most bonds today, you have one test. So in the SLL, it will be annual test. In the bond, typically will be once during the life of the bond, but the issuer will report annually in most of the cases. So it means there will be a regular discussion. Nevertheless, what ESG investors are clearly stating as well is that, you know, if that was to happen, this is also part of the market. You know, it might happen, and you know, the idea is that there will be really no, you know, shame or finger pointing to an issuer that has missed the target. The idea is to understand the reasons why it has been missed, and to try to accompany the issuer along the way. So that's from at least kind of an investor perspective. And the idea is really to have a business plan underpinning the target.
Great. Thanks, Agnes. We could go back to the questions. Don't know if you guys can see them. Okay. Try and
maybe if I could add another point of view in
yes.
on that question. I think that should always be remembered as well that again, here the targets are the company's target, they are your target, they are your strategy, and well, especially on the bonds, but on the loan, the same derives, is that they are based on your public commitments. So in a way, it is not for the bank or for the sustainability coordinator to say, well, the company needs to be there in 10 years time and subsequently there on 5 years, 3 years, and in the more interim targets. It's the targets that companies have set to themselves as well. And that therefore they have been you know, reviewed and approved by many levels of stakeholders included within the company. So it's very often, it is in more rare cases, I would say, but it's happened that targets, and it's happened mainly on the loan part, of course, for that targets are more ambitious than corporate public targets. So which is a different level, but I think that on the bond, due to the fact that the instrument is public, that is not possible. So therefore, I would say that the targets are what has been defined by the company. It's nothing out of the world.
So I guess it's important for the overarching sustainability strategy to be aligned with the financing framework and the instrument that you're issuing. All of those have to be together.
Yeah, it's all aligned. Yes.
Okay, great. All right, going back to the questions. Okay. All right. With the let's see who can answer this one. With the evolving nature of sustainability metrics, what are the pros and cons of linking debt pricing to external ratings versus those by a company to measure progress? So Agnes, Letitia, which one of you wants to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I can do if you wish. As ESG ratings have been slightly more used in SLLs, in loans. The real interest of is twofold, to have your own metrics. That I referred a little bit before, is you have a control to some extent. I mean, it's within your operations for most of the KPIs, that they are controlled and calculated as well, even though there is, of course, a reference to international benchmarks and the reporting, or the reporting norms that are coming up. So there is an harmonization of the reporting, which is important. But there are the KPIs that the company is calculating, reporting on, and has hopefully some control on. Whilst the difficulty with the ESG rating agencies, although they have a lot of data, and some of them have many years of data on public companies, relies on the fact that there are discrepancies among the results. They do from time to time have some changes and updates on their methodologies, which can have subsequently quite a high impact, financial impact for companies. Hence, I would say the movement towards really internal KPIs as well, that allow you to reflect a company's strategy. And I think that companies have had such amazing developments in their sustainability strategies in the last 2 years and even in the last year, that it allows to embed much more finely and much more personally, if I can say, what a company wants to reflect and to show its progress on to all its stakeholders.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, let's get back to our questions here. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, so maybe this is a good question for you, Natasha. How did you balance the KPIs for longer term instruments like bonds versus the shorter term facilities like the RCF? And Agnes and Letitia, feel free to jump in and support.
So we do have annual targets in our RCF. It's a 3+1+1. So when we refinanced it in 2020, it worked quite well with a lot of our targets being based around 2025. So we've got a trajectory aligned to those slightly longer dated targets within our facility. And we also have a number of targets from 2025 to 2030, and that's allowed us to issue an 8.5-year bond, because we've got 3 coupon step-ups after that 2025 target, and we've got others that we could potentially use for something for something longer dated.
Great, thank you. Agnes, Letitia, anything you wanted to add to that?
There was another question, I think not too dissimilar, on what happens for KPIs, especially in the bond market when there is a test date that is fairly long, because it's true that in a lot of transactions you will see targets at 2030 with, let's say, a long 10-year bond. I think here we always have a, balancing game where very often GHG emission targets, for example, a lot of corporates will still today have public targets for 2030, not before. So very often that's when you see this kind of 2030 target. And I would say the idea is, if you put, if as a structuring bank, we put a target at 2030 for long 10 years, so the maturity of the bond will arrive shortly thereafter, then actually the step up would be similar in terms of, what the issuer would pay overall. It would be similar. It would be it would be paid as a one-off effectively versus paid over 3 years. So it's all about kind of, balancing the best KPI with the ambitious target, and that in relation to the maturity of the bond.
Great, thank you. All right.
There was, Michelle, there was an
Yes.
earlier question I thought maybe for you, Natasha, how long the process took actually for the SLL and the SLB in terms of preparation?
So for the loan, I think it took us 4 or 5 months in total, but a large part of that was sort of establishing what KPIs we wanted to use and doing that groundwork of working out who internally we needed to work with, because it was the first time we'd done any sustainability linked financing. And that allowed us to accelerate the bond process quite a lot. So I think that took no more than 2 months, but probably a little bit less time than that, because we already knew who we needed to speak to internally. The big thing for us that was additional for the bond was doing the framework and getting a second party opinion on that. And that was the piece that took us a little bit of time to get that absolutely right.
Actually, that's a good point, because that's something I didn't mention earlier, but should have probably. It's true that today in the market, it is a recommendation in the sustainability-linked bond principles, but it's not a requirement. It has become market practice, I would say, and even more so in the EMEA, is that in the bond market, you have a framework, which is effectively a document that highlights how the issuers is following the 5 core principles, and then it's complemented by a second party opinion. So an external independent party that will review the alignment to the principle. And that I would say, yeah, almost the totality of the SLB are following that approach, and that was imported from the green bond and the social bond world. And what we see is that very often issuers tend to add, or corporates tend to add a reference as well to other types of financing under that framework. So there is a reference that, there is a bigger sustainability linked approach to the company. So.
Great. So I guess one question from me to you guys all, I guess getting that sustainable finance framework in place, I guess, is that sort of the key? And then from there, you're in a position to more swiftly move to market. Is that a sort of a direction that you're seeing, Agnes and Letitia?
I can say a brief word, but maybe Natasha as well and Letitia. Once you have the framework established, if as an issuer you don't change anything, then effectively it allows you indeed to be ready to come to market pretty much any time. So that's the value effectively of the document.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd also add that the first time you do anything, it always takes the longest. Once you've done it once, you know what you need to do for next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to complement on when if you are to do the SLL first, so Natasha created a new standard, I would say, and combined everything from day one. But for the SLL, it's not mandatory and it's not market practice to have the framework. You can of course have the framework done. What we usually do is more of a lender's presentation to explain. A lot of things that are explained in the framework is the link with the strategy of the company and the ambitiousness and the definitions. But yeah, it is not the market practice or not yet. So it can be a first easier step as well, in a way, before preparing to do an SLB with a full framework later on. That happens as well in the market quite frequently.
Okay, great. Thank you all. If we can get the questions back up so we can have a quick look at which ones have been submitted. Excellent. Okay, panelists, any there that you want to jump in and answer?
So maybe I would say the one on margin savings step-ups. How do we see the evolution? I think that on the bond side, it is the principles are mentioned that the variation needs to be commensurate with the standalone price. It is not yet said as such in the LMA principles. However, we see investors talking about the fact that if they are not meaningful at all, how serious is the exercise, and they could question the exercise. So some sort of commensuration is important. So we don't see the price differential, the variation, premium or discount, going anywhere smaller, rather the other way around in terms of going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. If we could have one final look at the questions, I think we've got time for one more question before we close. There we go. Okay.
I think there is,
science.
yeah, there is. I think there is one we haven't addressed. I can see, how do science-based targets impact the potential of sustainability-linked financing? Is it? I guess the question is it useful or not? I would say it's very useful. So actually, in the case of TESCO, that's what is being used as well in the sustainability-linked bond. I think, you know, where you can have science-based target, effectively, it really facilitates the assessment of the ambition, because you will already see a target that is aligned to a Paris Agreement scenario. And at least in Europe, the vast majority of sustainability-linked bonds are linked to GHG emissions, and in the vast majority of cases, there would be science-based target initiative validated targets. So I would say it's a very useful reference point to have those targets really based on science, and even more so when you can have some external validation for it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. Great workshop, lots of practical advice, and fantastic to also have TESCO share their live case study. I'm going to hand back to Simon so he can give the closing remarks, but thank you all.
Yes, thank you all very much, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I mean, clearly this has become a very large part of the financing markets, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to make this more robust, make sure that this market really drives good behavior and the right direction that we're all trying to achieve. But thank you for joining us, and please do get in touch with us through the stand if you want to contact us. Thank you.